Meanwhile, let's turn our attention to the cost of living crisis, which is inevitably linked to all of this. Michael Jacobs is political economy professor and former advisor to the Chancellor and Prime Minister. Gordon Brown joins me now. Michael, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk. So, we now hear that the Bank of England say that interest rates are going to be higher and for longer. At what stage is anybody going to call out Andrew Bailey as Governor of the Bank of England for not being competent and not being the right person for the job? Do you think he's taking the right moves?
Well, I think he's been given the task by the arrangements, which are that he only has one tool. He has interest rates to raise in these conditions, and so he raises them. The problem is the wider policy framework that we have, in my view. And of course, some people have been calling him out. There have been people in the Conservative Party, in the media, yourself just now, who have been calling him out. So it's not as if he's not had any criticism. But I have no interest in defending him. But he is doing the only thing that the arrangements that we have for controlling inflation allow him to do. I think the problem is the economic arrangements. That is the fact that it is only the Bank of England which can act on inflation, and it only has the one tool to do it, which is raising interest rates, which inevitably is going to cause a recession or very close to a recession in the UK. I think he's raising that now. The Monetary Policy Committee, it's not just Andrew Bailey, it's the whole committee, have raised them too far. I don't think yesterday's rate rise was necessary. I think we are about to find that within a year they'll be coming down again because we'll be in recessionary conditions. But right. I don't think this is all about one person, and I think that's a rather simplistic way of looking at the problem.
OK. When we look at the Bank of England, though, and their job and their role, one of the first things that Gordon Brown did as Chancellor was to hand control of interest rates to the Bank of England. Is that now seen, or could that now be seen as a mistake?
No, I don't think that was a mistake. And all around the world, central banks now are independent of government because, in general, the markets feel that governments, if they're in control of interest rates, will manipulate interest rates to suit their electoral purposes. They'll stoke a boom before an election to make everybody feel good so that they vote for the incumbent government. And we had that experience in the 1970s, famously, when the Chancellor under Edward Heath, Barber, stoked a boom, and then we ran into problems, and then we ran into the massive inflation of the mid-1970s. So I don't think anybody thinks that the Bank of England should not be independent. The question is, what's the overall framework? And when you have inflation, which is basically a problem of who gets the money, because obviously what happens in inflation is firms try and retain their profit margins. And it's their profit margins that are causing inflation, because their profit margins mean that they have to put up prices. So when firms try and put up their profit margins or retain their profit margins in inflation, then the pressure comes back on workers. So this is a basic problem of who's getting the smaller share of the smaller pie that we now have.
OK, you say that, but
government couldn't. Let me just finish the point. So government can do something about that. It can make it a little bit harder for people who've got the money and a little bit easier for people who've got less money. And that it can do through fiscal policy. And I would like to see an arrangement in which you haven't just got the bank, but you've got the government acting as well. But the government isn't doing that, and that's not what our arrangement suggests.
Is part of the reason for that that the government is dealing with the fact that we have the highest tax burden for 70 years? And also they haven't used the levers of government, particularly when, for example, 65% of every litre of fuel, and let's not pretend that fuel has been one of the big drivers behind inflation. 65% of every litre of fuel is tax. We've allowed ourselves to fall into this trap thinking, oh, well, you know, we need the money at central government level. In fact, it's stymied the economy, hasn't it?
No. Fuel tax has been frozen now for over a decade. So fuel tax is the one tax that has been consistently cut every single year by Conservative chancellors. So
yeah, but it's 65% of every litre of fuel is tax.
And that raises several billions of pounds for the health service, for the education service, for the police, for all the things that you would want the government to spend money on because you can't buy those things personally. So anybody who says, if that's what you're arguing, that we should be cutting fuel tax, or indeed any other tax, needs to say, OK, where's the money for the health service, the education service, the police, the immigration service, defence going to come from?
Waste less.
Are living in a... Sorry?
Waste less. The waste in government is absolutely extraordinary.
Let's be serious about this. It's so easy to say that, and yet we've had 10 years of austerity, more than 10 now, 14 years of austerity, in which the first thing that government said was, right back from George Osborne, and in fact Gordon Brown did it beforehand, is let's waste less. And if you look at public services, just go to your local authority, your local council, and ask them, where do you think you're wasting money? Show us where you're wasting money. these services have been stripped to the bone. It just is a myth that there's lots of waste to be cut now.
It really isn't.
It might have been in the mid-2000s, but there really isn't now. And it's a way of getting
How many diversity officers do we need to have in authorities up and down the country?
And how much savings do you think, if you got rid of all of those people, how much savings would you make?
Millions.
And how much savings, how much do you think fuel duty is bringing in? Millions? No, billions.
Yes, but
billions.
The thing is that a lot of those fuel duties...
But this is really important, because I'm afraid people on your wing of politics are constantly reverting back to the same old arguments that have not only been said, but used. Government has done what you asked. It's stripped away all the waste that
Government isn't doing what I asked.
There is no more money there. You have to be honest with the British public and say, if you want tax cuts, and you seem to be a supporter of Liz Truss's economic policy, which was unfundded tax cuts, so tax cuts not found.
You're casting. I'm not. The only thing of Liz Truss. The only thing.
I'm the guest. There's no point in having me on if you don't let me finish, because you brought me on to say something. So let me say it.
Wow.
If you and people on your wing of politics insist that the problem is we are paying too much in tax, then you have to be honest. You have to be honest and say, where do you want the public services to be cut? Do you want the NHS to be even more stretched than it is now? Do you want our kids to be in schools with leaking roofs, as more and more of them are now? Do you want the police force to be struggling to solve ordinary crimes?
And this is where we get to.
And that's the choice.
Michael, this is where we get to. I do want to see good public services. So
you've got to say where you'll pay for them.
So the way I would pay for them is that you... First of all, you need to be honest about the tax system. The tax system is too complicated. It is too targeted.
I'd agree with that.
It is too focused on short-term political gain and headline grabbing as opposed to doing the job that it needs to do. There are too many people who are not paying enough tax, and there are too many people who are paying too much tax, and the complexity is something which Gordon Brown started and the current government has exacerbated. They're all guilty, in my view.
So I would completely agree the tax system is too complicated, and some people are paying too much tax and others are paying too little. So we're on the same ground here.
Right.
So the question is who should pay more and who should pay less? We allow people who get money from wealth, from their shares, from their savings, from their land and property, from the rents that they get from people they rent their second homes to, we allow them to pay tax at lower rates than you and I and your listeners paying tax on their income. Why don't we at least have the same tax rate on the income that we pay from work as the income that people get from their wealth? That would be a simple reform, first done, of course, by Nigel Lawson, Conservative Chancellor. That would mean that the right people were being asked to pay a bit more, namely the wealthy. Why don't we charge a bit more in tax to people earning over, I don't know, £500,000 a year, instead of people on the bottom end who are now paying more every year as they're being dragged into into higher tax rates?
All of that I understand. I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but I certainly
So why don't you want the rich to pay more?
It's not a question of I don't want the rich to pay more. First of all, the rich do pay more and should pay more because we have a percentage system. It means that they should be, and I agree. I agree with you. I agree.
Where do you get the money from for public services that you say you want? If you're not willing to ask the rich to pay more, who are you going to get to pay more?
The thing is that the rich...
Who has the money?
Oh, for goodness sake, look, you said that this is a conversation. As far as I'm concerned, the rich do pay more. We have a percentage system. The more you earn, the more you should pay. The problem is that we have a range of loopholes that have been brought in, and I agree with you that there are some inconsistencies there, and therefore we should close those inconsistencies. But also, we have a salami slice of tax, so that, in fact, we don't have a very good knowledge in this country of who's paying what. And when you say, and let's go back to fuel duty, when we say, oh, well, you know, we've frozen fuel duty, 65% of every litre of fuel, and then we've just had these alcohol taxes where we're not even incentivising local and British businesses up and down this nation. We're just taxing them some more. It is a nonsense that we are not using the tax system to grow our economy and to push for investment in areas that we want to see growth. And to say that, oh, you know, we've got to get more money. The tax burden is higher than it's ever been. There is not much room more for manoeuvring.
I didn't say that we needed to get more from taxation. Taxation is at a historic high, and the reason for that is we have such low growth. What we're measuring is the tax burden as a percentage of national income. So there are two numbers there. The tax is high, but the problem is that national income is too low. And the problem is that if you cut taxes without having any way of of finding the money from alternative sources, and I've suggested a few there, which you haven't, you will simply get the markets reacting in the same way they did under Liz Truss. So, and the reason they're doing that is because they don't believe that that's a sustainable rate for an economy. And so they're saying, what they said during that episode was, if you want to borrow so much more money, and of course what Liz Truss was actually doing was borrowing lots of money. She wasn't growing the economy, she was borrowing lots of money. And the market said, well, we're going to charge you more for it. We're going to charge you more. And that was the problem she ran into. So you've got to have a strategy for growth. And that's the crucial part of this story. You've got to have a strategy for growth, and cutting taxes on its own does not generate growth. What generates growth is the demand that businesses need to say it's worth investing. You only invest if you can see the demand for your products.
Michael, I'm no fan of Liz Truss and indeed any of her policies, by the way. Let me bring in Sam Armstrong, who's been listening very patiently to all of this. Sam, what do you make of what Michael says? I mean, look, it sounds as if we've got, if Labour come in, we've got more tax, a complete misunderstanding of economics and policy and growth, and a blame storm. Well, Michael, let Sam join the conversation.
Michael's an articulate and intelligent advisor, and I have great respect for his role in government. But there is a time midway through what he was saying where I simply began to question what planet he was living on. Where has he been all this while? The tax burden is the highest in 70 years. There is no more tax to bring out. And the idea that we've had austerity for 13 years is for the birds. We are spending more than we've ever spent. NHS spending is up. Education spending is up. And by the way, the idea that there is no waste to cut, also madness. The Department of Health last year managed to cut 25% of its civil servants. 25% of its civil servants. We haven't seen any deleterious impacts. We haven't seen any disaster zones. That could be rolled out across every department, and you would begin to see big savings. And don't forget, and the one question I'd really have for Michael is why has public sector productivity not gone up since the millennium, whereas the private sector has managed to get 30% extra productivity out the same number of people.
Let's give Michael a final shot there before we have to go. Michael, so Sam's posed the question. Productivity in public sector seems to be languishing. Private sector much better. What can we do to improve it?
This is a very odd argument, isn't it? Productivity in the private sector has been more or less stagnant since 2008. So we've seen almost no productivity growth in the British economy since 2008. Every year, the Office of Budget Responsibility has to revise down its productivity projections because we haven't achieved it. And the reason for that is that there's not enough business investment in the economy, and not enough public investment either, but mainly business investment. If you look at the proportion of our economy which is made up of business investment, it's much lower than all of our competitors, and has been for many years, long before the Conservative government. This has been a problem for 30 years. And it's that lack of investment that is the root cause of all of this. That's why we have low growth. That's why we don't have productivity improvements. That's why we don't have money.
Arguably, that all goes back to tax. If you have a tax system that taxes too highly, guess what? Business isn't going to invest. Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. It's much appreciated. That's Michael Jacobs, political economy professor and former advisor to the Chancellor and Prime Minister Gordon Brown.